why go to a Harvard professor, as esteemed as you are, as renowned as you are? I mean, my main concern is a lot of things are coming out now. Disclosure Day just came out, popular movie. You just reviewed it, and I think it's I'm going to direct everyone to the Medium article about it. But amidst that, there was also a disclosure, kind of revelation by your friend David Grush and your friend Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna. And I want to get right to the point because I've been frustrated with both of them. I have, as you know, I've wanted to talk to both of them, and I'm hoping you'll make an introduction, a shidduch, as we say. But Avi, why can't I understand why David can't come forward? He could go to jail, and I don't want him to lose his livelihood or God forbid, Hasbro Shalom, get injured in any way. I have great respect for him. He's a great patriot. However, he's talking about things he's never seen with his own eyes. He's talking about things he's been told. And he's saying he can't come forward with what he's been told in more detail than sentient plasmoids and non-human biologics. Now, that may be true. I don't know anything about disclosure in terms of the government crackdown on an individual. I don't want any harm to come to him. But Anna Luna, your friend, who went to your observatory, who took a tour with you, who's on tour with you, she could do this in a heartbeat. And the fact that she's not releasing everything that she knows and she's hiding behind this suggests to me as just an independent skeptic, someone who wants to believe that we're not alone and wants to know that we're not alone. I don't want to believe anything. I want to know. So Avi, why can't she come forward and just tell us everything that she knows? She's not going to be put in jail. Come on.
Well, Representative Luna actually argues that we're not, and she is not being privy to all the information that is relevant to this matter. And what they are shown under secrecy in SCIF setups, which are basically Faraday cages where no electromagnetic information can penetrate.
Secure, compartmentalized information.
Yeah, secure. I mean, what they saw is intriguing, but I don't think it's the actual things that Grush was talking about. So there is a gap between the access that Congress people have and what Grush is talking about. There is a gap, and the question is it real? The fundamental question is, does the government have materials or even videos of clearly non-human made objects and perhaps even biologics, okay, which is the claim that is being repeated by a lot of people. But for me, it's unclear whether the government has it, because obviously there should be a retrieval and reverse engineering program within government for things that are found in crash sites of battlefields or elsewhere where adversarial nations are using technologies that we want to be aware of. So we collect those materials. We see pilots there as well. So if you wanted to sort of not to make adversarial nations aware of what we know, you might label those documents with aliens. And then if someone looks at these documents, they might think, oh, the US has in its possession extraterrestrial artifacts. And it's not obvious to me that it's not just a labeling system, that someone gave it a name and then the rumor was spread by a bunch of people.
He talks about interdimensional beings. She talks about interdimensional beings with the confidence that your colleague Qumran Vafa talks about 11-dimensional strings. And I don't know what that means. And they always say they defy the laws of physics, but you and I are physicists, Avi. They don't defy things that we can understand. So when are we going to get the actual hands-on data? I think it's...
Well, so part of the reason that I'm very happy to help government is, the first reason, of course, as a citizen of the US, I feel that my duty is to help them develop better sensors so that we can protect the nation. Okay, so it's really important not to have holes in our defense system, especially in strategic sites. And perhaps some of my insights as a physicist would help them. And I'm happy to do that. I would not feel that my time is wasted if we don't find anything other than human-made technologies. But at the same time, there is a possibility that there is something beyond that. And of course, even if it's one object out of a million, it will constitute the biggest discovery ever made in science. Now, the government is not a scientific organization, so they may be baffled, they may be uncertain, they may not know what they are dealing with. And in that context, I'm happy to help. If it exists, I have not seen it. So, I respond to evidence. I didn't have a lot of fun in Steven Spielberg's movie because, the artistic freedom that scriptwriters in Hollywood take is not to my taste. They violate the laws of physics. What people have to understand is, the laws of physics apply everywhere in the universe as far as we know, and they apply to every atom. It's not as if there could be free will of atoms, that one atom will deviate from quantum mechanics, because then whoever finds that atom will get a Nobel Prize. So the point is, the laws of physics are based on a huge amount of data that we collected so far. You can't just say, oh, I will violate it. The speed of light, I would violate, the speed of light being the limit of travel. I would introduce additional dimensions. If you can imagine those things, but unless you have evidence to support these ideas, they should not be regarded as real possibilities, because there are many more possibilities than the reality that we all share. So what we need is better evidence. You can't look at fuzzy images and say, oh, this is an object that lives in extra dimensions. That's not a good enough reason. You can imagine extra dimension mathematically, but it's not supported by data. So I respond to evidence like a detective. A detective goes to a crime scene, and there are various possibilities as to who is responsible for the outcome. And a good detective would not listen to what the people say, but would look for evidence that would clench the case. And that's exactly the work of a scientist. So in that sense, if we don't have good enough data, if the images are too fuzzy, if we don't know the distances to objects, what we need to do is not go philosophize about it, argue about it, have forums online and Twitter and on X and all this social media about it. What we should do is develop better sensors, get better data, and then assess the situation. And I'm happy to help the government go in that direction rather than regress back in time, because we cannot go back in time and check all these places where the reports indicated something unusual.
Well, I'm showing this from the Hollywood Reporter that David Grush is consulting on a new movie that's going to be about. Have you been asked to be on these films as well as David, or what do you make of it? I mean, do you think it's? I mean, it's a Jerry Bruckheimer
I should
movie.
tell you that a couple of months ago, I was on a movie set in New York City. It's called the Saul Hershkovitz and the Guide to Extraterrestrial Life. And they asked me to appear there for one day on a camera roll playing myself because the main character has an encounter with aliens and wants to speak with Professor Avi Loeb. And they bring me to the set and he asks me questions. So that I played myself basically, but that was my only overlap. And in that case, I basically said what I say to you. I spoke like myself. And so, but I assume that David Grush is in the spirit of Steven Spielberg, talking about alien bodies and other things that we have not seen yet.
Yeah, we have not seen, and that Do you find that contaminates the waters? I mean, I heard another interview. Again, I have great respect for these military guys. I was just on Sean Ryan's show. You helped me out preparing for that. Thank you very much. It should be out soon. But I told him, I get uneasy criticizing the military because I have so much respect for my stepfather was a fighter pilot and a refueler tanker in the Vietnam War and combat 50 combat missions. I have great respect for the military. I wasn't fit enough to get into them. I would love to be. And I support them. And I've had many of the military pilots that have witnessed encounters, shall we say, like Ryan Graves and others who haven't witnessed them themselves, I should say, that they've reported from their own squadron mates what they've heard. David Fravor is now reportedly yesterday was talking about Roswell and that the government should just come clean with Roswell. What do you make of the military? I mean, you and I did. I mean, you served, but I didn't serve. So what do you make of? Are we as civilians allowed to criticize people of 100 times bigger cojones than we ever have? I mean, again, I'm speaking for myself. You serve, I know, but tell me.
My impression is these reports are very sincere. I mean, I very much trust the integrity and the honesty of these military people, and obviously they serve the nation and they're very honorable. The fundamental question, as far as I'm concerned, is whether the objects they saw, and these must be real objects, right? Whether they had a good assessment of the distance to these objects, the motion of these objects, and in those cases also whether these objects are produced by adversarial nations that they are not aware of. And that's a matter of national security. So I think we should clean the uncertainty by simply getting better data, by checking what is flying around strategic assets of the US. And once we have better data, most likely it will indicate that we are dealing with um, uh, some human-made technologies, and that by itself would be extremely important, just like the discovery of the Chinese spy balloon. And if it turns out there is something else, that's just the icing on the cake,
Right.
as far as the Pentagon or the intelligence agencies are concerned. So I feel that it's worth doing, that this should be a matter that is, within the mainstream of science and within the mainstream of the intelligence agencies. And it should not be ridiculed the way it was in past decades, because now we have much better sensors.
But I point out they
And
also ridicule themselves. I told this to Sean, and I told this to Lex Friedman when I was on his show. The pilots who were the people that were most likely to haze, to tease, to make fun of, to mock were Fravor squadron mates and Dietrich's squadron mates. In other words, when they get back to the ship, they got mercilessly teased. I asked Sean Ryan, did you ever tease your friend who was worried about IEDs? And them being planted, or drones 20 years ago. Drones were very new. They looked like alien technology. He said, no, we would never do that because I know people whose legs have been blown off by actual
by the way,
IEDs.
I should say that in the latest release on Friday, which was the most intriguing, there were several pieces of information that were quite noteworthy. One is a letter written by the brilliant Dr. John Kozlowski. He is the director of the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And this letter was written on the 5th of June, so just a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
And this letter talks about an event lasting 2 days in October 2023, very recently, where a combination of orbs and kites and objects that were not fully identified were noticed. And the orbs, for example, they had the ability to generate smaller orbs, which is really strange. A mother orb creates a baby orb, smaller orb.
Yeah, I
And
saw that, but people said it was a flare, Avi. This is the problem. We have people that, they say, and there was
so I wouldn't discount it as flares, because they actually look specifically at flares and other possible explanations. They claim that 40% of the phenomena that were discussed by very reliable law enforcement officials, 40% are not easily explained in terms of what the U.S. currently possesses and adversarial nations, as far as we know, have. So I would not discount it. I would just say, let's get better data, and that's serious.
What do you make about? Sorry,
one second.
Yeah.
1 second. The other thing related closely to what you previously said is that is a report from the CIA in 1992, which says that in the late 1950s and in the 1960s, half of the reports on UFOs were associated with U-2 airplanes. This was a new technology, exactly as you are saying. Now, if in the late 50s it was already operational, and the US government denied that it has any such equipment, and so it was ridiculing the reports, whereas we know that they were related to these U-2 airplanes. So if in the late 1950s these were definitely operational, it must mean that in the early 1950s they must have tested them. And probably the Soviets also had, before Sputnik, they must have tried to lift objects, out of the Earth gravitational potential wells. So what I'm saying is there are lots of people saying, oh, there was UFO activity before the Sputnik era. We see it in photographic plates and so forth. But it wouldn't surprise me if these were glints from U-2 airplanes, which are very high and can reflect sunlight, or the early versions of Sputnik before Sputnik itself was launched.
And I am talking with Beatriz Villarroel this week, and I know that you guys have had some back and forth about her claims about this has to be outside of the atmosphere, not a U-2 as high as they fly, or SR-71, because they're showing glints that go into shadow on the Earth's. We'll get to that in a minute if we have time, Avi. But I want to get onto the headline news. I mean, we buried the lead for 20 minutes, and my audience is dying to ask you questions. And you have to be a member to ask questions. There's so many people that want to ask questions. You do have to be a channel member. It's 70 cents or something to be a channel member. But that's just to keep the volume to a reasonable minimum. Avi, the big question. when did you get the call? When did Trump call you up and say, Avi, I got a mission for you. You've got the best hair next to mine. Avi, I need you to help out. When are you going to
Well,
start this UFO council?
it was
That's
not
my Trump impersonation.
but it was a messenger that I hosted at my home. It was an in-person meeting, followed by additional conversations that lasted about a week before I started to assemble the council just a few days ago. And I was aiming to collect brilliant members, people who I know personally that have a very high level of intellect and also knowledge of the subject. And
That's
I
why I didn't
was
get the call. I didn't. I don't think I got the call, but maybe I was on a break. No, I'm just kidding. I saw. We'll talk about the team members in a bit.
I should say one thing that I selected one member to be a skeptic
Michael
because
Sherman.
it's very important in every committee to have someone who is the devil advocate that prevents the committee from losing sight of biases and
Yeah,
so it's really important in these days where people's opinions are very polarized and the two sides of the map always hate each other. They don't want to speak with each other and they say nasty things on each other online on both sides. People have to realize that in order to have an effective committee, you really need at least one person from the other side in order
that's right.
to introduce a sanity check that we are not just biased in the way we discuss it.
Exactly.
But in addition, I should also say that the quality of the work that we do really depends on the data that we get access to, because we will make the best lemonade out of the lemons that we get. I mean, if we get very bad lemons, the lemonade will not be so great. And so it all depends on the data, and that's the way I look at it. But I assembled a group of people that can give sound scientific advice that has all aspects of the phenomena. It includes the nerds that will analyze data with AI, machine learning. It includes also people who deal with psychology, anthropology, philosophy of anomalies, and theology as well. So because these subjects are interconnected with respect to the impact on humanity if such a finding is of something that is not human comes forward, we really need to know how to deal with it.
Will there be an official announcement from the White House or from the Office of Science, Technology, Policy? Like when will people online are curious if it's going to be officially sanctioned by some official White House channel?
Well, my sense right now is that the White House stands behind President Trump's directive, and that includes all agencies of the intelligence and the Pentagon. And in terms of declassifying whatever is not risking national security, and so everyone is on board on that. And the question is, what does the government really have? I mean, we hear all these stories, as we discussed before. Are they real? And of course, a lot of people wish to believe that they are real. I mean, Steven Spielberg definitely is confident that the U.S. government has bodies of aliens in its possession from crash sites. I'm not that sure. I mean, he, as an artist, he's allowed to think whatever he wants. But
Right.
as a scientist, I respond to evidence. And of course, if I have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, I would do so just because I think it's a very important type of evidence for the future of humanity, and I don't need to broadcast it to the public at large if there are reasons not to do it immediately.
Will there be a budget that you are authoring? You don't have to tell me what it is, but will there be a budget? Will there be transparency, oversight, governance, etc.?
No, at this time we are an advisory council, so my guess, based on service in similar committees, that the budget includes travel expenses when we meet in person. That's basically it. No personal compensation or any financial interest. But I think it's really very encouraging that the government comes forward to a scientist like myself and asks for assistance, because in the past it was more of an approach of keeping a distance
Right.
from the public, from the scientific community. So just the change in attitude, I think, is a great blessing, and I really appreciate the opportunity that they give us to have a conversation with whoever has the data and help them
Are you
yeah.
Are you worried about backlash? I mean, this is not a field where the light of heart fear to tread. And it said when you go to Washington, if you want a friend, bring an alien with you. But for example, I've also been disappointed. Again, I'd love to talk to Representative Luna because she's so involved and so energetic and enthusiastic. But
Yeah,
sometimes she
she's a
says
vision.
things. She says things that, quite frankly, I think are harmful to her own cause. For example, she called Kirkpatrick, basically accused him of not being forthright when he was leading AARO because he doesn't agree with the Lou Elizondo kind of Jeremy Corbell and that sort of faction. So he called into doubt basically Grush's testimony, and he was the one that was empowered. Now he gets the most hate of any guest I've ever had on the podcast. I mean, it's unbelievable how much vitriol he gets. And so,
Yeah.
at one level, we want to trust AARO, but AARO. But on the other hand, what if you get attacked by Luna in 6 months because she says you're not towing whatever line she wants you to tow?
Oh, no. I'm not worried about that because I will basically follow whatever the data suggests. I mean, I'm not the kind of person that would. Of course, I can suggest interpretations that are not confirmed, and I did that in the context of astrophysics because that's the way you operate. You just use your imagination. As Einstein said, the imagination is more important than knowledge. So given the data that we have, you can come up with possibilities, and then you decide which one is the correct one based on additional data. That's the way I will operate. But it's not as if I will bend my statements to political will, because whether we have a neighbor or not is not a matter of discussion. Either we have a neighbor or not.
Right.
It's, for the same reason that either the Earth moves around the sun or the sun moves around the Earth. Now, so it's really all about the data and the quality of the data, or getting new data that will help us figure it out. And so I don't think it's a political process. In fact, members of Congress on both aisles, of the political spectrum, they work together. And that's one of the unifying themes, actually, that everyone engaged with politics seems to be excited about discussing this subject. So I think it will bring actually people together rather than separate them if we where these things are, and not in the context of watching a plot on the movie screen, but in reality, which is, by the way, it could be much more inspiring because there may be ways by which aliens visit us that were never envisioned in Hollywood, because the training data set that encompasses all the real estate beyond Earth is far greater than what you find here on Earth. And our imagination is dictated by our experiences so far. So we're very limited, and we might be very surprised once we have the first encounter. Just to give you an example, we might think of biological creatures, but it could also be biology that is synthetic, that is something that waits for in our future. Right now, we are producing computer chips out of silicon. That's the source of artificial intelligence. But imagine us getting to a point where we can use biology to create artificial intelligence. That obviously will be far better, because the human brain is consuming only 20 watts compared to the gigawatts.
That seems to be
my point is that it could be very surprising for us to encounter something that is synthetic biology from an exoplanet, or a robot that is purely technological. I'm saying until we have that experience, we will not know who our dating partner is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that seems to be consonant with what Grush said, apparently, that there's a continuum from corporeal bipedal type life, which is a very shocking statement to me. I'm not actually more kind of perplexed or astonished by the fact that he mentioned, assuming it's true, a corporeal bipedal life form. Now, you know as well as anybody that bipedal life existed and evolved on Earth over very, very specific conditions. It's almost inconceivable that you could have bipedal life that's extraterrestrial, right? But that's more shocking than sentient plasmoid life and synthetic life, right? I mean, isn't it?
Yeah, so yesterday I wrote an essay on the question that I was asked by a fledgling biophysicist, and he asked me, if we find extraterrestrial life, visiting us or in another place, and how would we be able to tell whether we have common ancestry, whether we both have the same origin? And I answered it very simply. The life on Earth, the double helix, is twisted right-handed. Both the RNA and the DNA have a twist in the right-handed direction. Could have been left-handed, but the symmetry was broken. We don't know why. That's a mystery. Now, if we meet life that came from a completely separate source, it has 50%, even if it has the same building blocks of the DNA, RNA that we have, the amino acids, it could have 50% the opposite chirality. And therefore, if we find that multiple life forms, extraterrestrial life forms, have the same chirality as life on Earth and the same building blocks, it might argue for a common ancestry. It's sort of like meeting siblings of our family. And the question is then, who is the parent? If were we introduced here on Earth by some interstellar gardener? So finding extraterrestrial life or technology, in a way, also brings us closer to understanding our origins.
Now, there's one thing that I think is most likely, knowing, for example, my military relatives who are in special operations. I mean, these are the most elite people on Earth, as far as I know, and that they've been waterboarded, they've been tortured, they've been for our country, by the Pentagon, by the all these 3-letter, 5-letter agencies that you can imagine, that they've been fed and they've been tested to the limits psychologically, physically, to every level that you could imagine. And they're the ones that are very skeptical of a lot of these claims. For example, Avi, if you're dealing with, you have to know that there is a shadow government that has that Eisenhower called, in addition to the military-industrial complex, his very last speech that he gave in public life, he said that he's most worried about a scientific technological elite that would gang together and then exert their control by their excess wisdom. And he worried there was a shadow scientific academic front that was operating within hedge funds and operating within spy agencies and then Pentagon. So how will you be able to differentiate between evidence that's manufactured, so-called psyops, by the government that you're alleged that you are earnestly working for, shall I say? But how do you know that they're not going to work against you? They must be as smart as you, right?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I have my ways. First of all, I'm using my intelligence, and they cannot easily fool me. Okay, I'm not just a robot that will, given the evidence, I will follow, but I will just look for patterns in the evidence and whether they are trying to manipulate me. I mean, I can tell if someone tries to manipulate me. The second, of course, is that I selected some members of my committee that have, inside information. And so,
or maybe that's psychology, right? You have a psychologist on the team too, right?
I also have a psychologist, but I'm saying even, I have people who would be able to alert me to a manipulative scheme. And, some people are worried it will be a repetition of Project Blue Book. And I don't, frankly, my approach is that I don't care what happened before. I'm looking at the future, and it could be better than the past. And and the way I see it here is that we have better sensors, better scientific tools that we can apply to this problem and resolve it. The goal is to resolve it, not to listen to the people who jump up and down on social media. There are lots of people who have opinions. There are lots of filmmakers that have ideas, but my duty as a scientist is to promote a better understanding of the reality. And it may well be that the government has nothing, or it may well be that the government has really something that Spielberg doesn't know about. I want to get to it. And at the very least, I'm saying, even if you're down to earth and you say there is nothing beyond human-made objects, I say, well, I'm not wasting my time because I help national security in that context.
That's right. Now, another question that has come up, maybe it's just me who's interested in it. There was a survey done by Vickers et al. In Nature Astronomy in 2024. I just learned of it recently talking to some people that believe in things like intelligent design, which, I will consult with them and I'll talk to them. But I say the same thing to them as I say to you and anybody else in the CMB cosmology continuum as well. I want to see evidence, not belief. But this is what bothered me. They did a survey and they found that over 80% of astrobiologists believe, they use the word belief, in the abstract, that alien life exists outside of the Earth. And I said,
Yes.
that didn't bother me, the number. What bothered me is that they answered the question at all. Because, Avi, if I say to you, do you believe in astrology? You don't say, no, I don't believe in it. You say, I have evidence that it is false, that it is as good as chance at predicting whether Mercury is in the seventh house if you're going to get a parking ticket that day. What do you make of 87% of astrobiologists said that they believe on it? They didn't say, oh, I'm waiting for it to be, there's no evidence yet, which is what I think you should say. And how does that pertain to what you're doing now?
I should also mention that many of them said that they went into astrophysics because they were inspired by science fiction stories. What I would say on that is make an analogy with a congressman that 5 years ago, before he retired, he advocated for legislation against gay rights. Okay. And then when he retired from Congress, he admitted that he's gay.
Yes.
And so then you wonder, how is that possible? Well, he said that he wanted to satisfy his constituency and try to be popular, but it went against his personal beliefs, right? He could not have believed what he is trying to advocate for, right? And so you find people in situations, and that happens a lot in society. They are following the herd. They don't want to be in constant friction with their environment, so they follow the environment. They follow the herd. They advocate for the same things. And just because right now the popular view within the astronomy community is to talk about microbes and investing more than $10 billion in the Habitable World Observatory, they would say, yeah, let's zero out any federal funding towards searching for technological signatures because we are very focused on searching for microbes. Now, what I say is this is not a good approach because we don't know if it will be easier to find microbes than it is to find technological signatures, because we don't know how many objects might be within the inner solar system that are technological. We try to look for radio signals, but we ourselves are stopping to use radio communication. In fact, Artemis 2 started to use laser communication. So who knows, in 1,000 years, we might not use radio communication. It's an ancient technology. So to invest 70 years and then say, okay, there is nothing there, that's not the right approach, because looking for a package in our mailbox is a completely different approach than waiting for a phone call. So my point is, the mainstream is at risk by basically trying to reach a consensus. When you try to argue that we need, as a community of scientists, reach a consensus as how to invest all of our funds, and we must go in the same direction of looking for microbes, this is actually damaging innovation, because you want to encourage at least two approaches or maybe multiple approaches, so that if one of them fails, like for example the Large Hadron Collider failed to find supersymmetry, failed to find dark matter, okay, so if we get to a situation where we build the Habitable World Observatory and we have a hard time detecting oxygen, methane in the atmospheres of exoplanets because of some technical problem, because the signatures are not clear, I don't know what the reason might be. We need to have a diversification of our portfolio so that at the same time we invest billions of dollars in searching for technological artifacts within, the interstellar comets or rocks that arrive into the inner solar system. For example, we can explore them. So my point is, we need to diversify the portfolio of the way we invest in science. It's not about consensus. And by the way, right now, the decadal survey is considered to be a consensus document, and the astronomers are all aligned behind a single mission. I don't think that's the right approach. I think we should have multiple missions, especially in the search for life, because when I was dating early on, before I met my wife, I was aiming high. I always wanted to meet someone more intelligent than I am. And currently, the astronomy community is aiming low. They're looking for the most mediocre dating partner, more, microbes rather than intelligent beings.
Well,
And
yeah, I always tell the young, women that I get to advise, or when they ask for, advice from my wife, and how to meet the perfect man, she says, "Don't bother looking. I'm already married to him." Okay, Avi, we got questions from the audience here. So many questions. You have to be a channel member, but we've got literally hundreds of members. Swain Main 6969. I don't know what that code stands for. Avi, many say we're on the verge of government Trump announcing alien life and craft and bodies. Yet it sounds like this board of yours, your council, to collect data, analyze it. Is disclosure imminent?
well, that would be wonderful if it is, because frankly, my life will be worth living if I realize that we have a lost sibling out there, as someone else. Right now the universe appears to be, and Brian, you know that in all the textbooks it's described as a mix of radiation and matter and dark energy. This makes the universe feel lonely and cold. And
Yeah.
however, if we realize there are intelligent beings out there, we will have an emotional connection to the universe. We will have a reason to go interstellar. I'm not talking about going to Mars.
Yeah.
That's just another rock that happens to be near us. I'm talking about when we realize that someone is visiting our backyard, we might want to visit their backyard. And then it changes everything for us, because not only philosophically or theologically about our place in the universe, we are not at the top of the food chain, cosmologically speaking, but also in terms of our ambitions and our aspirations and priorities. Instead of killing each other on this rock for territories, like, this is ridiculous. It's a piece of rock that is, a few times 10 to the minus 6 of the mass of the sun that happened to be left over, and we fight over it when there is so much more real estate out there. And so we would realize that we have to change our perspective. Sort of like it's a transition bigger than the Copernican revolution, when that Galileo helped pioneer. Because it's not just that we are not at the physical center of the universe. It's just, it also means that, for us to be remembered in the history books of the Milky Way galaxy, we have to become interstellar. Not Martians, interstellar.
No, that's right. And that reminds me of one of my favorite books. See, this tells me that Avi is a close friend, because he sent me an early copy of that book, as well as the first book. Okay, next one comes from Sigel Strategic Research. I'll add it to the conversation. Reports of strange things before the 18th century are not influenced by Pentagon U.S. security restrictions. The Roman legions saw flaming shields in the sky, and we can go back to, Yehoshua and the Torah and other things. For example, or this 1933 Magenta, Italy sighting. And I've heard a lot about that. I mean, I think Grush brought up stuff from the 1930s. I mean, is any of that relevant? I mean, we can't even agree on what happened yesterday.
It's definitely interesting and intriguing. The problem is that the data is very sparse. It's not comprehensive. It's not scientific quality. So we can't do much with it except for saying, look, these things happened over the past century. They should also happen now. Okay, so for example, there were claims that the Apollo astronauts noticed UFOs around the moon. Well, if that's the case, then why didn't the Artemis 2 astronauts notice anything unusual they had much better cameras. There are claims that there were, transients from glints on satellites around the Earth in the early 1950s. Well, surely right now, the Director of National Intelligence would have been alarmed if they noticed satellites that do not belong to specific nations that we know about. If they saw a fleet of 1,000 satellites moving around the Earth, they would immediately, this would be a red alert. They would have to figure it out. They would get as much data as possible. So I don't think right now it's possible to hide things as much as 50, 100 years ago, when the technologies of sensors were much worse. And therefore, if we don't see right now things that people claim to have seen, let's say 50 years ago, then I would not buy those stories, because verification, validation is a very important aspect of science. And of course, if we had excellent data from long ago, for example, if we had a piece of material that I can examine in the laboratory, I can tell you whether it's extra solar, whether it came from outside the solar system, because even if it has more than 1 gram of material, I can examine the isotope ratios and tell you that it's not from the solar system.
Mm.
And so we need good data, scientific quality data, in order to assess it. And the problem is many of these reports from the past do not have that high quality data, and they could be just misidentification of things that are common on Earth.
Now you mentioned the kind of the technological aspects of things. One thing that came out recently from the James Webb Space Telescope is that 3I Atlas appeared to have some methane emitted from it, and I tweeted that that's kind of like having a chemistry stockroom sent from another solar system. I noticed you also lowered the value on the Loeb scale. Can you talk about the recent findings from James Webb and the methane found from?
Yeah, that's really intriguing because the methane appeared after 3I Atlas came close to the sun when it was warmed up. But methane is far more volatile than CO2, carbon dioxide, which was detected already in July when the object was first found. And so the question is, how is it possible that we detected carbon dioxide but not methane when the object was far? Because methane is much more likely to be sublimated, evaporate from the object. And of course, the authors of the paper argue that, well, perhaps it was removed from the outer layer of 3I Atlas
Right.
and buried deep in. So only when it's sort of like onion shells, only when you clip off the outer shells by warming from sunlight, you end up reaching the depth where methane is buried. That was the argument. But then carbon monoxide, CO, was also detected back in August 2025, before perihelion, before the object got close, without methane. And carbon monoxide has roughly the same volatility as methane. So I think it's a bit puzzling why methane was produced close to the sun. And I just said it's a biosignature. There are papers in the literature saying methane would be the first molecule to be a biosignature if we find it in the atmosphere of an exoplanet. So I asked, is it possible that there are some microbes that were revived as a result of 3I Atlas coming close to the sun, and perhaps they emitted the methane? So I actually am finishing a paper this week with my student estimating how much mass in microbes do you need in order to produce the level of methane that was observed.
Now you wrote recently. Oh, sorry. You wrote recently about the Palomar transient. That some of them, most of them, perhaps could be cosmic ray hits. I mean, 60,000 impacts on a plate that are all aligned, and they have three-dimensional trajectories. Right now, Beatriz Villarroel, who again I'm having on in a couple of days this week, and I'd like to understand what she's saying that it's highly unlikely according to the Busco and other analyses. So they say that it's not likely at all. So where do you come down now? Do you find her or this other reanalysis?
I mean, the reason I brought this up is first because of the Apollo astronaut images that showed these blue lights, but they appeared also outside of the lens of the camera. So it was clear that these were triggered by something that has nothing to do with objects in the sky. Now, with respect to the photographic plates, I was intrigued by the fact that there was a paper, analyzing the Palomar plates and stating that there is an anti-correlation between the UFOs, these transients that appear only in one plate but not in other plates. There is an anti-correlation between their appearance rate and the geomagnetic storm activity on Earth. So when the sun emits a coronal plume of high temperature gas and it impacts the Earth, that triggers a geomagnetic storm, then the number of transients went down. So it was anti-correlated. So then they said, well, maybe the UFOs somehow avoid geomagnetic storms. I just Googled it, I checked, and it turns out that cosmic rays have exactly this anti-correlation because plumes of plasma that carry magnetic fields, they push away the cosmic rays from the Earth. And so that there are fewer cosmic ray hits. So I'm saying, look, you identify an anti-correlation. This is a natural consequence for cosmic rays. We know that. We also know that cosmic rays introduce a background. You cannot avoid that. So let's just not confuse cosmic rays with UFOs. Okay, that was the only point I made. And they said, oh, we are confident it's not cosmic rays. But why is there this anti-correlation? It must mean that at least some of the sources are cosmic rays, because otherwise you wouldn't get. Why would the UFOs care about geomagnetic storms this way? And the other thing is that now that the CIA report came out, I'm still wondering if there could be human-made objects that are part of the other transients that they saw, and they saw transients near nuclear test sites, and obviously that's a very good location for
And military
espionage.
bases. Yeah, the Tic
Yeah,
Tac was seen right off the coast here. Yeah.
or the U.S. military trying to monitor the conditions before the explosion takes place.
Well, if you had to go back and revise your feelings about the first interstellar object, Oumuamua, how would you rank it on the Loeb scale today, knowing everything you know?
Well, I think we suffer once again from lack of information. So there were the anomalies of the object being most likely flat and changing its brightness by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling every 8 hours. That is a very extreme shape for an asteroid or a comet. And then there was no cometary tail around it, no gas or dust detected, and yet it was pushed away from the sun by some non-gravitational force. So given these anomalies, I ranked it at 4. Most likely it's natural, but, and I should say, right now, the comet experts define it as a dark comet, meaning a comet that doesn't show cometary activity, and they listed additional dark comets within the solar system. There is one of them that we wrote a paper about with my colleagues, and Adam Hebert and others, and where we showed that one of those is actually following the same path as the Phobos 1 mission that was failed. This was a mission by the Russians, and they sent the wrong prompt. The technicians sent an extra semicolon that triggered the loss of power in that spacecraft. And we show that it could be the dark comet that they're talking about. Now, the Japanese, the space agency wants to, they said, oh, let's first take some data on it. So there was a paper last year of data, and it became clear the object is about 10 meters in size. And moreover, it's very shiny. It reflects 50% of the light, the sunlight impinging on it. So it's shiny, and it's spinning really fast every 5 minutes. So it must be very sturdy. And they want to land Hayabusa 2, that's a spacecraft. They want to land it on top of this dark comet so that we can understand how the outgassing takes place. And I'm saying, go ahead, make my day, because they will do it in July 2031. And imagine them landing on this object, the dark comet, trying to figure out how the outgassing comes from it, and seeing a label made in the Soviet USSR. Imagine them doing that. And that we can test in July 2031. It's the beauty of science that you can actually check. And I wonder if the lesson learned from this experience by the Japanese, if they land on it and it looks like it's a human-made object, whether people would say, oh, wait a minute, maybe Oumuamua also was technological.
So Stephen asks if there have been several non-human species visiting our planet for decades, as Eric Davis and David Grush claim, could humans coexist peacefully with them if the truth gets out that they're here?
Oh, definitely. I think they had a lot of opportunities to kill us. And if they are here, a very reasonable scenario is that they coexist in a way that we can't easily notice them. And they are sort of, they regard the experience as an experiment where they look at us and see what we are doing, but they do not intervene. We don't pose a threat to them. They can easily do whatever they want if they have much more sophisticated technologies. They might have accidents every now and then, like any endeavor. An interesting question is whether life or intelligent life on Earth was planted by some interstellar gardener. That's something I really want to know, whether what we regard as a natural sequence of events from a primordial soup of chemicals on Earth, to human intelligence, whether that was actually had the milestone along the way, milestones that led to human intelligence that were artificial in origin, that they introduce things and we are not aware of that, of course, because documented human history is very limited. So it would be really revealing if it turns out that we think that we live in a brave new world that we created, but in reality, it's just a world that was created by someone else.
Now, last couple of questions. Swain asks, it's very weird. Why are these objects so interested in U.S. military bases? They must have far advanced technology than our military does.
Well, that goes back to my the null hypothesis that I have, that they are human-made objects and they are used for espionage.
And then my final question to you is, if we do, sort of get definitive contact, whatever that might mean, are you going to change anything about yourself? Would that cause you to reevaluate, the fact that they would send something biological, perhaps? And actually, before I ask you that, Avi, why would they send something biological when they could send AI? I mean, what do you think is more likely?
Oh, no, because maybe for us, AI is made of silicon chips because we are not advanced enough. So actually, just a few days ago, every day I get very interesting things that I haven't anticipated. I got a question, and the question was, why haven't we seen self-replicating probes, von Neumann probes? Because even if one civilization in the Milky Way galaxy had that ability to create self-replicating probes, we would see it, because it would grow exponentially, this population, and would reach us. Okay, and we don't see it.
Right.
So the question is that evidence against, say, self-replicating probes? And I replied, what are you talking about? We see, I speak every day with self-replicating probes. These are biological entities.
Right.
The human DNA is self-replicating, right? And so an interesting question is, perhaps the highest level of technology is one that uses chemistry and uses the raw materials on the surface of a rocky planet to self-replicate, which is exactly what we are doing, biology does. So maybe we are self-replicating probes that came from another place.
Very good. Now, if we do get contact and you do get this private information, and Trump brings you in back into the office, takes you up to the Oval Office, Avi, and makes you an offer, what are you going to do? What happens the day after? It just seems like disclosure day. Everyone's building up. What happens disclosure day +1 for you personally?
Well, okay. So for me, it's like a kid that enters a candy store and just gets a huge candy, and I would just enjoy that candy as much as I can. Now, there are, of course, implications, because it would affect policy, it would affect the stock market, it would affect, our aspirations, and so there would be huge implications for our future. But at first, just this knowledge by itself would take me a while to fully digest. I don't need to speak with anyone. I will just think about the implications. Every morning I jog at sunrise in the company of ducks, wild turkeys, birds, and bunnies, and I just think. I don't need to speak. When people approach me on the road, they say good morning, and that bothers me, because it cuts off my stream of thought. So I would just think for a while about what it means, what we should do next, and how can we promote a better future for all of us. And I think it will be a better future. So
Halavai, Avi.
A lot of us are frustrated by what we read every day in the news, and I think it's an opportunity for us to change everything in a better way.
Avi Loeb, thank you so much for joining us today. You got to go talk to the big shots at Time Magazine, but I do appreciate you, and I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with, because I think you guys are doing the most rigorous and most important kind of scientific analysis, and you're doing it as a scientist. The fact is, people ascribe a lot of stuff, nonsense, to you that you don't believe in, that you've never postulated, and to have a real scientist on of your caliber and stature and interest, curiosity level, and let's just see where it goes, right, Avi? So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Happy Disclosure Day.
All I can say is that I will try not to disappoint all of you. I will do my best, and it's not about the messenger; it's about the message.
Wonderful. Avi Loeb, thank you so much, my friend. Talk to you next time.
Thanks for having me.